As those of you who have been attending the AEI Election Watch sessions know, I usually moderate these sessions, but today I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the most interesting exit poll results to set the stage for the rest of the discussion. First, I'm going to be discussing the changes in the composition of the electorate that were quite striking in a number of ways, and they inspired clearly the shellacking that President Obama felt that he received. And then I'm going to touch on some of the most interesting findings in terms of what voters told the exit pollsters on Tuesday. The partisan makeup of the electorate hardly changed on election days, but independents swung massively in the GOP direction. This is the third election in a row in which independents voted out the party in power, this time by 55 to 39%. In 2006, they voted for the Democrats by roughly the same margin. And speaking of independents, in Florida they supported Marco Rubio and not Charlie Crist, the independent candidate. The ideological composition of the electorate changed very substantially. Self-identified conservatives on Tuesday were 41% of the electorate, up 9 percentage points from 2006, and they voted massively for Republican candidates. The share of liberals in the electorate remained the same. Women were more than half of the electorate, as they have been in every election since 1980. We had a gender gap once again, with women dividing their votes this time between Democrats and Republicans, and men voting for Republicans by very substantial margins. But what is significant about this election is that Republicans did better with women than they have done in any House contest since 1980. Despite the fact that there may be some losses in Congress for women overall, women win just as often as men at every level of our politics. And in a pattern that we've seen in the past, women tend to vote for Democratic, not Republican women. In Connecticut, California, and Nevada, women pulled the lever for Democratic candidates. Voters in union households were 23% of the electorate in 2006. On Tuesday, that dropped to 17%, and their support for Democratic candidates dropped 4 percentage points over the same period. 2/3 of Hispanics backed Democrats, as did 6 in 10 young people and 90% of black voters. The problem for Democrats was that neither young people nor African Americans turned out as they had in 1980. The percentage of young voters dropped by half from 2008. Obama's efforts to rally the base failed nationwide, though his efforts in Nevada to rally Hispanics appeared to have been successful. We had in this election, as in past election, a bell-shaped education curve. People with less than a high school education, a very small share of the electorate, 3%, pulled the lever for Democratic candidates, as did those with a postgraduate education. Postgrads were 20% of the electorate on Tuesday. All of the education groups in between voted for Republicans. The three groups that I watch most closely, because they have an almost perfect record of voting for winners, delivered for me once again. Independents, I've already mentioned, white Catholics, and people with some college education voted substantially for the GOP. In 1988, 12% of voters had incomes above $100,000. Today, a quarter do. In 2006 and 2008, people at this high income level split their votes. On Tuesday, they voted massively for Republicans by almost the same margin that they had in 1988. Republicans, had their best showing among union households since 1994. Now let's look at some of the attitudes. Neither the GOP nor Democrats were regarded favorably on Election Day. 43% rated the Democratic Party favorably, 41% the Republican Party. What's significant about this and worrying for the Republicans is that in 1994 and 2006, voters had a net positive view of the incoming party. That wasn't the case on Tuesday. The exit pollsters asked people to choose from a list of issues and to pick the one that was most important to them. Not surprisingly, the economy was the top issue on Election Day. But what is significant about what voters said on Tuesday was that if you add up all the other issues the exit pollsters asked about and take them all together, still almost twice as many voters said that the economy and not healthcare, immigration, or Afghanistan combined. Just 14% of voters said their family's financial situation was better than it had been 2 years ago. Although that question isn't always asked, it appears to be the most pessimistic reading on it since 1984. 3 in 10 voters said that someone in their household had lost a job in the past 2 years. When asked their opinions about government, 38% said that government should do more to solve the country's problems, but 56% said that it should do less. In only 4 of the 26 states for which we have data did a majority want government to do more. Those states were Connecticut, Delaware, Hawaii, and New York. Speaking of immigration, 2/3 of Arizona voters favored the immigration law in that state, but they didn't want to punish illegal immigrants already here. 55% said that most illegal immigrants should be offered legal status. 37% said most should be deported. 31% of voters said that Congress should expand the new health care law. 16% leave it as it is, and 48% repeal it. In the 26 states for which we have data, majorities in 7 states supported repeal. Finally, getting back to the president, just 45% approved of the job that he was doing and 54% disapproved. And perhaps more worrying for the Obama administration, for the White House, 43% said that in the long run, Obama's policies would help the country, but 52% said that they would hurt it. Now I'll turn to my colleague John Fortier to talk about House and Senate contest and the shape of the electorate. Thank you.
Thank you, Carlin. We're going to have a little PowerPoint presentation here. I'm going to make 4 large points. First, to try to assess the size of Republican gains, of the size of the wave in a number of different ways. The simple answer is it was a very big wave. But the second point is that it actually lapped over many conservative districts, many swing districts, but it essentially stopped at the mildly Democratic districts. There are no, in the House, there are no very Democratic districts or even moderately Democratic districts that are held by Republicans, only a few that are slightly Democratic. And then finally to look at what's changed since 2004. Is it in a sense back to the future? Have we just transported ourselves back in time to after the 2004 election? And in some ways, yes, the numbers are not going to be so different, a little more in the House for Republicans, a little less in the Senate. But something has changed, that there's actually more polarization, more Democrats representing Democratic seats, more Republicans representing Republican seats. So let's start with the size of the wave. How big was this election? You can look at the numbers here, and I'm going to focus on the House and let Henry talk a little bit more about the Senate. But the House, after the 2004 election, Republicans had 232 seats. They're likely to have a little bit more than what you see up there, 239 seats, because there are 11 undecided. But in the neighborhood, a little bit more. Biggest seats. We've ranked the last 100 years of midterm elections, and I know Michael will tell you about the 1922 and 38 midterm elections. He was not there. None of our panelists were born, I think, in at least in 1922. I won't check your birth certificates, but 2010 ranks very, very high. It's certainly the largest gain for an out party in seats in the House, and that number actually depends a little bit on some of these undecided races, but is much higher than anything we've seen in a couple of generations. Senate elections, of course, here is where Republicans did still quite well, but not as well as we might have anticipated. And if there's one silver lining for Democrats in what was generally a dark cloud, it is a couple of Senate races, especially in Nevada and Colorado, which kept Republican gains probably to 6. We're counting Lisa Murkowski or perhaps Joe Miller in that number 8 slot, 8 out of 26. Governors, again, there were a couple of outstanding races, but 10 seats, a very large gain, not quite as large as 94, but just short of that, and bigger certainly by a large matter than 2006. And then finally here, a very stunning result in the state legislative elections. And here that number is actually likely to go up because there are still some outstanding seats that have not been counted. And Republicans gained over 650, perhaps close to 700 seats in state legislatures across the country. That is substantially larger than the Republican gains in 1994 and more than twice as many as Democrats gained in 2006. And Republicans are likely to be at really their high watermark since before FDR. So they really have gained significantly in this area. So we took all 4 of those factors, we put them all together in a relatively simple way of combining the ranks. And how does it rank historically? tied with 1994 for the third largest midterm election in the last 100 years, gained for the out party. Again, but for a Senate race or even one of those close governor's races, which could go the other way, it would be second. And it depends on how you want to weigh these factors. Clearly in House and state legislative seats, the most in recent years, a little less on the other side, but still quite impressive. Okay, now let's go back and remind ourselves of where we were in 2004 on the map. 2004, after a close Bush-Kerry election, we're going to look at seats that Democrats have picked up and actually that Republicans have picked up before this election. So in the 2006, 2008 elections and in the special elections that we've had. This is the territory which changed hands since the 2004 election, but before Tuesday night. And you see Democrats with very significant pickups, 56 pickups. Here, I'm going to use my pointer here. There are two Republican pickups that were made in that time. That was Charles Dejoux in Hawaii and Joseph Gao in Louisiana. And you'll note that both of them actually lost the other night. So all of those seats were primarily in the Democratic direction. And now let's look at where we stand after the election. Changes from 2004 to today, knowing the election results. And you'll see that many of those seats, to go back, that many of those seats, 36 of those Democratic seats that they picked up have gone back into Republican hands. They only hold 20, and Republicans have picked up 24. Again, I'll note that there are some projections made on the West Coast, and I actually think that number may be slightly smaller in a couple of those races, but you get the idea. Let's look now at the partisan composition of the changes. Again, going back to post-2004, how many seats were, in a sense, out of place? How many Republicans won in districts that John Kerry won in 2004? This is, again, just after the 2004 election. And how many Democrats won in districts that Bush had won in the 2004 election? And here you see, quite in some ways, a very small number. 65 out of the 435 were out of place. But Democrats having a much larger fraction of those changes. And you see some Republican seats in the Northeast and a few out in Iowa and the West. And what you'll see in the next slide is what happened because of the big Democratic waves of 2006 and 2008. Well, what happened? Almost all of those Republicans were lost. There were just 5, including those 2 new ones that I mentioned before, hanging on before this election, where John Kerry had won, that Republicans still held a seat. And Democrats picked up those numbers. They gained a number of Republican-leaning seats, 35 or so seats, or 30-plus seats that they had not had before. So the map for Democrats before the election from a couple nights ago, Democrats were holding some pretty substantial Republican territory. Let's see what happened with the election. That number has gone down, dramatically, and you see now going from 85 districts that Democrats hold that Bush had won to only 26 districts. And if you look again where the blue disappears, lots of the South, lots of the plains and western states. And Republicans did pick up a few Democratic-leaning districts. I will note, I think some of those West Coast ones, or 2 of them, are speculative. They're still being recounted. Both Rick Larson's seat up here and Jerry, I guess that's Jim Costa's seat down there. They might go the other way, so it might be even fewer Kerry Republicans. And so now you look at less than 40 seats out of the 435 are essentially out of place. Less than 40 seats where Republicans hold Democratic-leaning seats and Democrats hold Republican-leaning seats. More polarization. Finally, to illustrate this point even further, let's look at, these are seats before Tuesday night's elections the Democrats held where George Bush had won those districts by 60% or more. So very Republican seats. And, Democrats held quite a few of them in the South, one in Texas, in the Plains seats. What happened? Where did that Republican wave hit especially? What happened after the Tuesday night results? 1 seat left. Jim Matheson of Utah survived that. The other 12 seats all went to Republicans. There still are, if you go back, a couple of seats that are pretty Republican in Colin Peterson's district and Dan Boren's district. Ben Chandler is probably likely to survive in Kentucky, but those are not quite as Republican as the ones I saw. But This wave washed over Republican seats. It washed over some swing districts. But the edge of that wave, I think, essentially is, if you want to look at the most Democratic seats that Republicans hold, there are four seats that John Kerry won with 53% of the vote. Two of them in Pennsylvania, Paul Kanjorski's district, the Joe Sestak seat former seat in suburban Philadelphia, Jim Oberstar's seat in Minnesota, and Mark Kirk's seat, which they were able to hold on to in the Chicago suburbs. Those are the four seats. That's the edge of the wave. Those are the most Democratic seats that Republicans hold. If you look at a seat that John Kerry won with more than 54% of the vote, they are all held by Democrats.
Thank you very much, John, for that illuminating series of maps. It segues very nicely into the commentary I want to make on the House, which is why what could have been a mild wave turned into a historic tsunami. I discussed the long-term intellectual forces at work on a piece that I wrote on National Review Online called Day of the Democratic Dead that appeared the day before the election, so I would encourage you, if you're interested, to take a look at that. I want to focus on more of the nuts and bolts. There are two types of seats that swung back primarily. John's identified one set very clearly, and that is the Republican seats that were picked up in the last two elections by Democrats. Many of them, if not all of them, but many of them slipped back into the Republican pattern this time. But the other seats are seats that are dominated by the group that I've been talking about throughout this Election Watch series, and that's the white working class. So I want to focus on that again and see what happened here. According to the exit poll, the white working class voted for Republicans at the House by 29%, 63 to 34. This was much stronger than any other group. Based on education and race, Republicans carried whites with college degree by 18 points, 58 to 40. But that becomes even more striking when you compare it to the 2008 poll. In 2008 at the House, Republicans carried whites with a college degree by 6 points, 52 to 46, but they only carried whites with working class degree by 10 points, 59 to 44. So a 12-point shift on the margin between whites with a college degree, but a 19-point shift margin in the whites with working class. And then let's take a look at how those whites voted in 2008 for the presidential election. And you'll really see here what was going on. Whites with a college degree only voted for McCain by 4 points. So among whites with a college degree, you had a phenomena that you could see through casually looking at the elections. The Obama Republican, the person who's a habitual Republican who voted for Obama. The white working class, however, voted for McCain by 18 points. And there you see a long-term historic trend that we've seen throughout the modern political era, which is that whites without a college degree are much likelier to support Republicans at the executive level than they are at the legislative, and particularly at the House level. So what happened on election night was that the two groups among the white working class who have split their ballots for various reasons all decided to vote Republican. And the first group is Southerners and others in rural southern-leaning districts like southern part of Indiana. A lot of the southern Ohio districts have strong southern heritage. These places traditionally voted Republican at the top of the ticket and Democrat at the bottom of the ticket. That tendency has been lessening over the last 30 years, but it persisted until last night. Key examples of those seats are Virginia 9 with Rick Boucher, Mississippi 4 with Gene Taylor, Missouri 4, which is, again, not necessarily a southern seat, but one influenced by that heritage, Ike Skelton, and particularly Tennessee, the Davis seat. I put a blog post this morning that since called Gone with the Wind on the Enterprise blog, that since 1832 the heart of the Democratic Party was white rural Southerners. Even as recently as 1980, a majority of seats were held by white rural Southerners. Today there are 6. There are more Republicans in New England and New York than there are white Democrats who represent rural Southern districts. But that would only ascribe for part of the gain. You would have the natural Republican seats surging back. You would have rural Southerners no longer splitting their tickets. But what you also saw, perhaps for one of the very few times in legislative history, is Northern Democratic white working class voters voting Republican. You could see that in places like Minnesota 8, a seat that has not been carried by Republicans. Michael can, I'm sure, correct me on this. 1946. Thank you. I was going to say living memory, but Michael was alive. My living memory.
44, the Republicans won. They lost it in 46.
Okay, 44. Pennsylvania 11, a working class seat in the Wilkes-Barre region, historic coal mining district. Illinois 17, Democrats along the Mississippi River, Rock Island, that Phil Hare lost to Bobby Schilling. Wisconsin 7, David Obey's seat. And then there are other places where Bush narrowly carried, but are essentially working class Democrat seats, like Bart Stupak's Michigan 1. These Democrats, these people who traditionally vote Democratic at the top of the ticket and Democratic at the bottom of the ticket, voted Republican this time, largely because of anger about the direction of the country that President Obama is taking them. So the question is this unique? It seems unique in one sense because of the size of the wave, but this is in fact the fifth time since the Great Depression that we've seen a massive Republican gain, and each time it's been founded in large shift among the white working class, oftentimes, although perhaps not as excessively as this time, although Michael knows 1946 better than anybody, among the northern white working class. Of course, in 1946, rural Southerners voted for Democrats regardless, as a legacy of the Civil War. Each of those times, 1946, 66, 1980, 1994, now this time, and the four previous times, you saw a massive swing in white working class areas towards the Republicans, largely because of anger at the same sorts of issues that we see today, anger and concern about massive, rapid federal expansion of governmental power. So does 2010 imply that the Republicans now have a majority? Well, not quite, because if we take a look at what Republicans did with their previous examples, we can see that this is not necessarily a sure thing. In 1946, and Michael's written extensively about this, Republicans passed many things that were policy-wise, I think, could say were a success, but politically it was a disaster. The white working class northern seats that were at that time primarily dominated by union members took umbrage at the Taft-Hartley Act and swung massively back to the Democrats. And in fact, that swing back prompted the turn to Dwight Eisenhower, who explicitly ran on a platform of modern republicanism, which is, say, no more expansion of the New Deal but no repeal, which in turn led to the creation of the modern conservative movement, which was formed in opposition to Eisenhower republicanism. So we can make the argument that this political decision in 1946 set up the modern politics that we have today in some direct sense. 1966, Republicans not took power, but they did take the presidency. They did take power in a number of state legislatures across the country, including the last time in my home state of California that they've held a majority for more than 6 months since 1958. But they didn't know what to do with it. Again, they didn't know. They didn't want to, and they didn't think that they could repeal a lot of the things they had run against, but they didn't have an alternative aside from basically continuing what went on with perhaps lower funding schemes. And one sees very quickly that there's no legislative confirmation of Richard Nixon's presidential victories. The state legislative gains are lost very quickly, and we move back into the 70s as working class voters return home. 1994, with Newt Gingrich, we saw very quickly with the government shutdown that a move to quickly move towards more base Republican concerns fizzled out. Republicans lost seats, and you very quickly saw again an Eisenhower-like response. George Bush ran specifically as, not explicitly, but implicitly as not Gingrich, not Clinton, very Eisenhower-esque in that sense. And the legislative congressional majority moved towards the earmark culture that wouldn't govern with a clear philosophy. Again, stuck between the Scylla of repeal and the Carbitis of reinforcing the welfare state. They couldn't figure out where to go. The only successful iteration in this is 1980, where Ronald Reagan took a different course. Ronald Reagan took the course of principled prudential reform. Many conservatives at the time criticized him. Why couldn't we repeal the welfare state faster? We ran against, if government's the problem, not the solution, why do we still have big government at the end of the Reagan era? But he was wise in a way that many of his philosophical allies were not, since he understood that at that time his task was to plant the tree of liberty in the garden of Roosevelt. And he succeeded. He succeeded in a way that today everyone takes a look on the right and claims Reagan as their intellectual godfather. And on the left, for 30 years, people have debated about how to react to the Reagan legacy. That sort of principled prudential reform actually solidified conservatism and Republican support much stronger than either of the Me Too or old line responses that have otherwise characterized Republican response. Now, I think some conservatives might claim that this policy, even today, is still selling out. But I want to quote a wise man to my right who wrote in the Almanac of American Politics in 1982 that politics at the national level in America is always a matter of personality because of the central importance of the presidency, but it is also a product of ideas. For 40 years at this time, the ideas that have been associated with the term liberal have prevailed. In 1930, most Americans did not believe that the federal government had a responsibility to maintain a strong economy with low unemployment and to provide sustenance for those who could not find it for themselves. In 1980, most Americans do. The liberals have, in effect, written the history books. Most Americans believe that Franklin Roosevelt was a good president and Richard Nixon was a bad one. Well, I think in the 30 years since, we can amend that and say that in 1980, most members of the white working class believed that government intervention could assure them a stable and growing economic life. Today, most members of the white working class do not. 30 years ago, most Americans didn't necessarily believe that entrepreneurial, vibrant capitalism with minimal government regulation could provide a growing economy. Today, I think most Americans would. Ronald Reagan was able, through his program of principled, pragmatic reform, to change the attitudes of Americans over time in the same way that Franklin Roosevelt was able to do in the 1930s. So my summation of what happened and where we're going, the Americans, there's an apocryphal story about the American Constitution, that the Constitutional Convention, Ben Franklin left, and an American came up and said, "What sort of government have you given us, sir?" And he replied, "A republic, if you can keep it." I think today Americans have given, for the 5th time since the Great Depression, the Republicans a chance for a majority, and the question is, can they keep it?
Thank you very much, Henry. Michael.
Well, it's a little daunting to begin a presentation after having had my words written 29 years ago flung at me. Approvingly, and I since Newt Gingrich isn't here, I would argue that the '94 Republican surge resulted in somewhat more policy success than you suggested, but. Thank you for bringing back. If you simply had omitted the name of the author, of course, I wouldn't have recognized at all who was writing. Would have thought, where did you get that garbage? Anyway, I'm here today to talk about state governments, which weren't really a focus of much national attention in this campaign, but I think. The results in the races for governor and, interestingly, in the races for state legislature, to which John alluded, I think could turn out to be hugely important, both politically and in terms of public policy. As in last year's elections, in governor elections in New Jersey and Virginia, which have given us a very large national figure in Governor Chris Christie, the issues in these contests were roughly congruent with issues in congressional races, issues in national politics, raising the questions of the size and scope of government. Republican gains in governorships, and perhaps even more so, their great and large and to a great extent unexpected gains in state legislatures, I think, demonstrate the strength of voter rejection of the big government policies of the Obama administration and the Democratic congressional leadership. At the Senate level, Democrats, by adroit campaigning and negative campaigns against opponents, were able to limit the Republicans' gains to somewhat less than they had hoped for. But the House races, and even more so the state legislature races, show the strength of the anti-big government trend here. Overall numbers are that there were 37 governorships up. Going into the election, Democrats held 19 and Republicans 18 of them. Republicans held 13 of their 18 governorships and won 12 of the 19 currently held by the Democrats. So assuming that candidates currently in the lead will hold on to that lead, we're ending up with the Republicans having 31 governorships and the Democrats 19. I think that's not quite an historic record, but obviously it's a considerable preponderance in favor of the Republicans. Now, there was some good news for Democrats in several of our largest, three of our largest states. Jerry Brown won in California, as he did in 1974 and 1978, absent the wide lapels and bell-bottom pants. Democrats, according to the early returns, actually gained a seat in the California Assembly. That's pretty hard because the redistricting in California produces less than 1% of changes in congressional, state, senate, and assembly districts in the course of this decade. In New York, Andrew Cuomo won by a wide margin against a Republican who could charitably be described as eccentric. I'm not going to use the term straitjacket here. Rod Blagojevich's successor in Illinois, Pat Quinn, seems to have held on. He leads by less than 10,000 votes in a state where county clerks seem to have violated the Military Voting Act and declined to send out ballots to military members, although they did transport them to inmates at the Cook County Jail. Otherwise, the news was very good for the Republicans. They now hold the governorship in both houses of the legislature in 6 of the 10 largest states: Texas, Florida, Pennsylvania, Ohio, Michigan, and Georgia. They won Democratic governorships in Pennsylvania, Ohio, Michigan, Wisconsin, gained control of both houses of the legislature in each of those states. In addition, they gained control of the legislatures in Indiana, Minnesota, Montana, and one house in Iowa, in Maine and New Hampshire and New England, in North Carolina and Alabama in the South. Altogether, the figures I got from the National Conference of State Legislatures show them gaining 125 seats in state senates and 500, the figure that John made reference to, 543 seats in the state houses. Obviously, there's still some counting to do. California, well, we recently had an election on Sunday in Brazil. They counted the votes in less than 5 hours. California takes 5 weeks. There's something wrong with this picture. But in any case, we haven't got the final tally, but they have won, as John said, more state legislative seats than in any election since 1928. And they won more than the local political experts, at least the ones that I've been in touch with, have predicted. I mean, Republicans needed 5 seats for a majority in the Pennsylvania House. They won 15. They needed 4 seats in the Ohio House and got 13. They needed 13 in the Michigan House. The inside Michigan politics said earlier this year that was impossible. They ended up winning 20. They needed 2 in the Wisconsin Senate, 4 in the Wisconsin House. They got 4 and 14. Needed 12 in the Minnesota Senate, 21 in the Minnesota House, and got 16 and 25. And I understand that Republicans have never had a majority in the Minnesota Senate prior to this, although I need to fact check that claim. The Republicans gained in Upper New England 22 seats in the Maine House and 122 seats in the New Hampshire House. New Hampshire, for reasons of its own, has the nation's largest state legislature, 400-member state House of Representatives. This will have important consequences in politics and could have important consequences in public policy. Politically, this means the Republicans will have the largest advantage they've ever had in the redistricting of congressional seats, at least since the 1920s. And in fact, there was no reapportionment of the seats among the states in the 1920s, so there was very little redistricting done in the 1920s. Referenda mean that California and Florida will join Iowa, Washington, and Arizona as states which where drawing congressional boundaries is the responsibility primarily or solely of nonpartisan commissions rather than of legislatures. But in most states, this is the prerogative of the legislature and the governor. Interestingly, North Carolina, the governor does not have a veto on redistricting bills. So the Republicans have both houses of the legislature in North Carolina. The Democratic governor cannot veto their redistricting bill. In the 29 states with 5 or more House seats, redistricting can make usually a significant difference, more so the more districts you've got. And the outlook now, as I tote the numbers up, is that Republicans will have control of redistricting in 13 states with 165 House districts Democrats will have control of redistricting in 4 states, with a total of 40 districts. In 12 states, neither party will have control because of partisan balance or because of the existence of the redistricting commissions. Moreover, where Democrats have control, they have relatively little room to gain advantage. Illinois, with a projected 18 seats, Democrats' advantage depends on Governor Quinn maintaining his current narrow lead. In Massachusetts and Connecticut, Democrats already hold all the seats, and Massachusetts is going to lose one in reapportionment, in which case there will be a game of musical chairs with Democratic congressmen giving large contributions, I'm assuming, to the Democratic state legislators and making friends of the State House. Maryland, the 4th state, already has a strong Democratic partisan plan that gives Democrats a solid 6-2 advantage, which in 2008 they extended briefly to 7-1. In contrast, Republicans have control in Texas with 36 districts, Pennsylvania with 18. These are the projected numbers. The reapportionment will be announced in December. Ohio with 16, Michigan with 14, Georgia with 14, North Carolina with 13, Arizona with 9, Tennessee with 9, Indiana with 9, and Wisconsin with 8. And in my judgment, all those states are areas where having control of redistricting can be significant in increasing your partisan balance in the House of Representatives delegation. So I think that they will be Republicans are in a good position to consolidate and build on the gains. They gained House seats in every one of those states in the election last Tuesday. I should add that redistricting doesn't guarantee an enduring advantage. Earlier in this decade, we heard people say, well, the redistricting that was done in 2001 or 2002 or in Texas and Georgia in 2005 locks in the redistricting party for the remainder of the decade. Those predictions have not survived the 2006, 2008, and 2010 elections. Pennsylvania was registered by Republicans to have a 12-7 Republican delegation. It became 12-7 Democratic in 2008. It is now, I gather, going to be 12-7 Republican once again, but not because of redistricting, but because of change in the balance of public opinion. Governors and legislatures, I think it's also well to reflect, can make enduring contributions on public policy. Only consider how Wisconsin and other states, led mostly by Republicans like Tommy Thompson, but also by some Democrats as well, made significant changes on welfare policy. Congress came waddling in late to the game with the Welfare Reform Act of 1996. It was built on changes in policy that have been demonstrated to work in the states. In addition, and states can be laboratories of reform on other issues. We've seen this on education, where once again the federal government has sort of caught up with some of the things that have been going on in some of the more venturesome states. We've also got the potential of a severe fiscal crunch in state governments. California, New York, and Illinois are all states where Democrats remain in control, with the exception that we don't know whether the Republicans will regain the majority in the state Senate they held from 1965 to 2008 in New York. Those are 3 states with huge financial problems. They face enormous pension obligations. Public employee unions have been dominating public policy in those states for many years. They have been receiving, as Meredith Whitney pointed out in the Wall Street Journal yesterday, in effect they've been receiving federal aid as well from the 2009 stimulus package, from various forms of bond subsidies that they have enjoyed from the federal government. They face the potential of a severe crunch, and it looks like they've got a House of Representatives that will be in no mood to bail them out. I think that that's an issue that may arise. Something similar to the bankruptcy of New York City issue in 1976 is something that may happen in the next 2 years.
Thank you, Michael. Norm.
Thanks, Carlin. Let me just start with a little clarification, all the joking about birth dates. Michael was in fact born in 1946 in Kenya before he moved to Indonesia, and then was smuggled into Michigan. To all the C-SPAN viewers, I'm kidding. Really, it didn't happen. One little comment on what Henry said. It's important, I think, to realize that after the 1982 midterm elections, the commentariat basically agreed on one thing. The era of Reagan is dead. Reaganism is gone. Reagan is a dead duck. Of course, it wasn't nearly as severe a backlash in the midterm as we saw this time, but Republicans lost back 26 of the 33 seats they gained in the House. And, of course, those predictions, as so many among pundits, were wrong. So I would not attribute much in what happened Tuesday to any projections, linear or otherwise, about 2012 in any way, and I think Henry's cautionary notes there are appropriate. Of course, the elections are not over at this point, and many of us have our eyes continue to turn toward Alaska as we wait for the write-ins. I'm not referring to the Senate contest, but the critical vote for the mayor of Wasilla. With those write-ins, can Levi Johnston get into the double digits is the question. Now, my task is to talk about the road ahead, and I want to start with a venerable story that I've told many times before that's a cautionary note to the winners. It's a story that takes place in the first-year anatomy class at medical school, where the professor, using the Socratic method, says the question of the day is, what human organ, when appropriately stimulated, grows to 8 times its normal size? And he looks around the room and he says, Miss Richards. Miss Richards turns beet red and says, I refuse to answer. So he looks to the other side of the room and says, Mr. Hendricks. Mr. Hendricks says, why, the pupil of the human eye when it enters a darkened room. The professor says, that's right. And Miss Richards, I have 3 things to say to you. 1, you did not do your homework. 2, you have a dirty mind. And 3, you are doomed to live a life of unfulfilled expectations. Now, that was as true for liberals in 2006 and 2008 as it is for many Tea Party members of Congress coming in now. And it's a reflection of the difficulty of governing or of turning your gains into something that approaches what you want and hope will happen. The most interesting statement, I thought, from Election Eve actually came from the likely incoming Speaker, John Boehner. And I quote, while our new majority will serve as your voice in the people's house, we must remember it's the president who sets the agenda for our government. Now, we could use one of 2 interpretations for that statement. The first is that the level of civic education and constitutional studies among our members of Congress is even more abysmal than it is in our high schools. The second is that it was part and parcel of what has become a concerted effort by many in the Republican establishment, from John Boehner to Jeb Bush and others, to dampen expectations and try and keep many of their more fervent members from going off whatever reservation they can create. And that, of course, is why virtually all have said, this was not about us. It had nothing to do with us. It was all about a rejection of the president's policies. They do not want to create any expectation that there is a mandate for an agenda ahead, because that expectation will almost inevitably be dashed. But it also suggests some of the difficulty ahead, which is not just going to be focused on one party pitted against another at the polar opposite of the spectrum. It is going to be an intense internal struggle within both political parties. For Barack Obama, one of the great problems is going to be discontent and ferment in his liberal base. Another interesting statement on Election Eve came from the defeated Russ Feingold in Wisconsin, who, as he spoke to his crowd, said, it's on to 2012. Now, that could mean many things, but one of them is a potential challenge to Barack Obama for renomination. And, of course, we know that presidents who do not succeed in winning a second term usually face that kind of a challenge from their own party's base. But we also know that as efforts are made to find areas of common ground looking ahead. That on some of those, take trade for example, where we could easily imagine Barack Obama, who has indicated his support for the free trade agreements with Colombia and South Korea, getting them through this Congress. But he would get them through with more Republican votes than Democratic votes, and both labor, which has seen its great hope for the last 2 years, talk about unfulfilled expectations with the Labor Reform Act dashed, will not be happy campers if Obama immediately turns to ally with Republicans and a small number of Democrats for trade agreements. And that will be true as well if we look at some fiscal package that might include changes in Social Security. And, of course, within Republican ranks, we are going to see some very substantial tug-of-war between the pragmatists whose goal is to win elections before anything else. And here I will note two other comments over the last couple of days. One was Mitch McConnell's rather inartful statement that the top political goal for his party was to make Barack Obama a one-term president, which probably should have been preceded by, of course, we want to make good public policy for the country. But regardless, it's a reflection of a reality. They want to win elections. The other was Jim DeMint, who has been, for Mitch McConnell, a kind of neighbor, a little bit like having Freddy Krueger live on your block, and who now will find many Freddy Krueger families moving in to the street. But in his words of advice to the incoming class, said something I've never heard a member say before, which is, you'll get on committees, but never mind those, because they'll just want to make policy and co-opt you into going along with whatever they agree to. Forget about that. You want to go on the floor and block all of this stuff and throw your grenades basically on the floor. You're going to see a lot of that and a lot of those tensions emerge as you get people coming in who believe that even if this were not about them, it was a massive enough repudiation of the agenda that we've seen for the last 2 years that they have every reason to move to take a meat axe to that agenda. Now, one other little cautionary note as well. While it is true that as we look at the polls, we see a substantial increase in the number of people who self-identify as conservatives, and there's no question that this was a backlash against government. There was a fascinating question asked in a CNN poll that I saw yesterday where people were asked, what do you want to be the top priority for Congress when it comes back? And leading the pack by a large margin was a new stimulus package. Now, you can square that circle any way you like. The way I square it is Americans are not ideological, they're pragmatic. They want what works. When government doesn't work, throw out the bums who want a bigger government. When the private sector isn't working, let government step in to help us out. And right now, they want to get the economy moving, and they'll be happy to take a government package that works, if it can work. And whether that will come a cropper with a lot of people coming in, or expectations out in the public that this will now mean not just change in policy, but an economy moving again, will be interesting. Now, a few other comments. We are looking towards nasty and brutish politics and policy making ahead, but some of the key questions will emerge before this new 112th Congress convenes on January 3rd with all of its new members. We will have a lame duck session, and it is going to be particularly interesting to see whether pragmatic Republicans with a Democratic Congress are able to move some of the sticky issues off the table for now in a lame duck. That would be much more difficult to resolve early in a new Congress that they do not want to see hitting the ground with bickering and stumbling. Top of the list, of course, is the tax cuts, which expire at the end of the year. And whether they can reach an agreement, a compromise that would basically just punt probably for a year. Either put it all off or make some of the tax cuts permanent and have the others last for a year, is a critical question. If they cannot reach an agreement, then we will see all taxes that have been cut go up on January 1, and that includes an estate tax moving to a draconian level of $1 million individual exemption and a 55% rate. And that will, I think, not be viewed very favorably by voters. And there is no assurance, of course, that as they come in on January 3rd, they then can reach a deal. In fact, it might go on for months. A second is the budget itself. We have not had a single appropriations bill for the fiscal year that began October 1 enacted into law. We have a short-term continuing resolution in place. Can we get that moving along, or will we have potentially a shutdown in the government at a very early stage next year? What about the START treaty, which has all kinds of implications beyond the treaty itself, including how much Russia will cooperate with sanctions with Iran, and which becomes a much tougher issue in which to get 67 votes when the numbers shift from 59 Democrats to 53 or perhaps fewer. And then keep in mind that we have something else on the agenda in the weeks ahead, and that is 2 ethics trials in the House of Representatives for Maxine Waters and Charlie Rangel. Now, the House Ethics Committee actually was one of the few places showing close bipartisan cooperation in the last Congress. Not necessarily always for the better. Part of it was the bipartisan agreement to see no evil and hear no evil. But it also broke down under the heat of election pressures in the final weeks. There was no chance that there was going to be a trial of these two leading right up to the election, in part because many members of the Ethics Committee themselves were in very tough re-election battles. But the Republicans on the committee all took a broadside shot at the Democrats. And Joe Bonner, the ranking member who had worked very, very closely with Zoe Lofgren, now has a fairly substantial gulf created between the two. Will those trials result in partisan bickering, or will they reach an overall agreement? And with that agreement, it could potentially also create more trouble for Barack Obama with his own left, a sense by many that this was an unwarranted focus on African American members where others had done similar things and so on. Now, where could we see agreement? We could see it, as I mentioned, on trade, difficult as that is. There is a very real potential for a renewal of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act with a revised No Child Left Behind that not only would have the support of Arne Duncan and John Boehner, but a substantial number of members on both sides of the aisle. We could imagine it, as you've heard before from many, on energy, not focusing on limits like cap and trade, but on expanding alternative energy sources, including nuclear and others. One of the most interesting areas for potential cooperation is infrastructure. We know that a very substantial share of the business community, which poured a lot of money into electing Republicans to Congress, wants a major infrastructure package. My guess is that the vast majority of the Republican freshmen coming in would view that as business as usual, big government spending money again. And we may see a very interesting tension develop there. We're going to see a larger set of clashes, I think, because even if we get agreement in some of these areas, which are significant but marginal, we're going to go from a Congress that passed a lot of sweeping legislation to one that will pass very little. And much of the action moves to the executive branch, and we're going to see a substantial tug of war between the branches, not only in the form of subpoenas and requests and demands to testify, but also real challenges to the exertion of executive power. I will predict confidently here that the Wall Street Journal editorial page is going to suddenly rediscover that there is an Article 1 in the Constitution, which had somehow been placed in the attic over the last couple of years, and that many of these battles will turn to the courts, and we're going to focus very heavily on the courts adjudicating them. But we are also likely to see shutdowns, more than one, of the government as we go along, despite the cautionary notes of Republican leaders who remember what happened in 1995 and 1996, and look to it happening earlier this time, not just potentially over continuing resolutions, but with the debt limit ceiling being reached probably in March, April, or May. It is hard for me to imagine votes from either party going to increase the debt limit, and hard to imagine it being done with one party alone out there on a limb, given the larger public mood. And that may lead to something very difficult. Now, I want to end on an upbeat note, which is that I can imagine an optimistic scenario here. I can actually imagine a larger agreement on budgeting and economic stimulus that would include an infrastructure package, and maybe in the form of an infrastructure bank with public-private partnership, combined with tax cuts that would include possibly a payroll tax holiday and some of the other breaks for businesses that would be accepted as a stimulus and that might get some bipartisan support, along with very possibly the promise of some more sweeping tax reform a little bit further down the road. We know that Dave Camp, the incoming chairman of the House Ways and Means Committee, and Kent Conrad, the Democrat who's chaired the Budget Committee, have actually engaged in some conversations over tax reform. And just as we had in a very unusual situation, there's rarely major policy made in the second term of a two-term president. 1986 with Reagan, working with Dan Rostenkowski and Dick Gephardt and Bill Bradley was the exception to that, with sweeping tax reform, a kind of tax reform that either would broaden the base and lower the rates, or that might move to a very different form of taxation, away from payroll and income taxes to either a consumption tax or something else, could be on the cards. Now, that's not out of the question, but the prospects remain quite slim, and the prospects of a nasty and brutish couple of years are much, much greater.
Thank you very much, Norm. I'm sure all of you have questions, but I'd like to ask Norm one question, and then we'll turn to the audience. John Boehner gave a speech here a few weeks ago in which he talked about reorganizing the House in a different way. I wonder if you could talk about what he said and what your reactions were to that as someone who's watched the House for a long time.
It was a very good and impressive speech. It was not the kind of speech you might expect in the weeks leading up to an election that bashed Nancy Pelosi and the Democrats. It was one that said, hey, we didn't run things well when we were in charge. They haven't run things well, and I'm determined to make it better, to open it up, to have many more amendments on the floor, to have sunshine in the spotlight, insisting that they would not bring up any bill that didn't have 72 hours advance notice, no matter how difficult it would be. But he also noted that he wasn't at all sure that his colleagues were going to be amenable to many of those things. He's also looking at some significant committee reform, which is now long overdue. And I think it was not just some tactical maneuver, but utterly sincere. But it's also important to note that when he got to the Q&A, one of the first questions was about the health care issue. And he pledged to bring to the floor something that would repeal the $550 billion in Medicare cuts that are part of the health package. That's moving into somewhat dangerous territory, because if you're going to get some kind of a broad agreement on the fiscal disaster ahead, you're basically taking Medicare off the table. And, of course, it's also saying, I'm a fiscal conservative. We'll protect every dollar of Medicare spending into perpetuity. That's not a good way to start a discussion about fiscal responsibility.
Thank you, Norman. We'll now turn to your questions. There's a hand over here. If you could wait for the mic and then please identify yourself.
I'm Jeff Burnham at Georgetown University. I think Henry or John, maybe Henry, given his remarks, could answer this. Let's suppose the economy had turned out the way Obama and Biden thought it might. So let's suppose we had 7% unemployment. Let's suppose there had been a net gain, let's say, of 2 million jobs. I know that's an implausible scenario, but that's what they put forward. Suppose that had happened. Would all of these shifts in public mood and opinion and, the white working class moving the other way, would that have happened? I mean, is this election really all about the state of the economy and all of the factors you've been talking about with respect to public opinion and public mood are sort of epiphenomena, which are a result of the current state of the economy, and not something. And the implication would be they'll go away in 2 years if the economy does recover.
I'm not sure it would have been a plus 64 seat gain, but I do think it would have been a substantial seat gain because we've had before examples where a large centralization, rapid implementation of centralized federal power have been advanced during cases of a growing economy, whether rapidly growing like in the mid-60s or recovering quite rapidly as in the early 90s, and the white working class reacted in exactly the same way, even though that those results were not being implemented in the background of a dramatic recession. I'm sure the economy had something to do with it, but there's something much more innate that's going on here.
John, and then Michael.
Yeah, I'm a little different than Henry on this. I mean, I think there are three components of why we saw the wave. One is the natural tendency of a midterm election to go against the president in power. That's a modest component. I think the economy was the biggest component. I do think I agree with Henry that the third component is the ideological one, the worries about debt, deficit, larger government, the Obama administration moving too far too fast. But even some of those concerns might have been lessened with a better economy. The numbers are always better when you have a better economy. The deficits appear smaller. So, I think it would have been a move in the Republican direction, not a tiny move. But I think the economy was the larger part of this. And Norm's point that from now, 2 more years is a long time. From 1982 to 1984 was a long time, and the conditions can change. They might not. If they don't change, Barack Obama's in very big trouble. But if they change for the better, he's in a lot better position.
Michael.
I guess I would say that the big government component is the larger component. Public opinion was turning against Obamacare by August 2009. We saw not only protests in the recess, we also saw the first polling there showing Republicans ahead in the generic ballot question, which candidates do you favor for the House of Representatives? I think that the expectations were that the economy would recover more than it turned out to do, and that when you started getting the economy showing weaker signs that show up in the statistics first for the second quarter of 2010 and then for the third quarter, that played some role, but I think that people were turning against Obamacare when their expectations for the economy were higher and more positive than they turned out to be since the middle of this year.
Carlin, I just want to add one note. After the 2008 elections, and right after, we were saying 2010 was going to be a good Republican year. The pendulum had swung widely twice in a row, and we haven't seen that, a gain of more than 20 seats in the House, 2 elections in a row, since 1930-32. It was only natural that it was going to swing back, and the question was whether it would swing back the way it did with Reagan, with losing many of the seats that they picked up in those 2 elections in the House, and perhaps holding their own in the Senate, or whether it would be more like Clinton. And it turned out to be Clinton plus. But I'm not at all sure that the attitudes towards the health care bill would have been the same if people had been more optimistic about the course of the nation, which is driven more by the economy than anything else.
Yes, here in the front.
Penny Eastman with L1 Identity Solutions. Norm, I don't know if you know this. There are either 3 or 4 of the Senate seats that get seated prior to December. Prior to January.
Right, they get seated immediately, actually.
Yeah, I have Illinois, Colorado, West Virginia, and Florida. Is that right?
Florida is not
Florida's not,
on
so
that
it must
list.
be the other 3?
Yeah, and Colorado was going to be the same, but it's not, at least as of now.
Is the only one.
Yeah, so you get one shift, basically, and in Illinois.
Lewis, Rollin, Burris.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
And then, so what do you?
Roland, we hardly knew you.
And Norm, what do you think is how? Well, so
it doesn't make much difference. It could have made a significant difference if all of those seats had switched to the Republican side. then the numbers would have been 55-45 instead of what will now be 58-42. So you don't have enough on your own to overcome filibusters. Frankly, after an election of this sort, it's not like they're going to do stuff in that fashion anyhow, and they couldn't get those things through the House regardless. So it ends up not meaning very much, except we see a few different faces.
What are your predictions for the lame duck? I mean, do you think they're going to be able to get anything done in the lame duck?
Logic would suggest that you do the tax issue both for tactical reasons and for policy reasons. In a fragile economy, even for a few weeks to have taxes go up dramatically and to have a significant number of people who are going to die in January and February. I don't know if you saw the rather extraordinary statement of the Congresswoman from Wyoming last week saying that some of her constituents had said that they would pull their own plug before January, which is not. It's kind of it will get your attention. Let's put it that way. But logic in this case doesn't necessarily work given the larger political dynamic. Now there are obvious compromises that you could reach that would kick the can down the road. I still think it's more likely than not that they do it. Some of it, let me say, depends on whether the outside forces that were building in September and October to try to completely delegitimize the lame duck session, saying that these were people who were hijacking the policy process after the voters had spoken. If you get that kind of a drumbeat, it becomes much tougher to cut a deal. Only if that gets dampened down will we see it happen.
John?
I'm looking for a lame duck session. I think it's not likely to produce that much. The one exception Norm mentioned earlier might be the START treaty, although we might not finish it up. But I think that's one area that some of the work that's been done might carry over either in the lame duck or the next Congress. The tax cuts, yes, in some ways it would be responsible to deal with them before they expire. But if they expire, there'll be some problems how we print the tax tables, but we can put the genie in the bottle again and actually sort of retroactively put them back where they were. And I think a temporary extension for a year or maybe 2 years, just putting it past the next election, is probably the most likely outcome. Right now, the president seems to have moved a little bit in saying, well, maybe temporary extension for the higher income and permanent for the lower income tax cuts. My guess is the final resolution will be temporary for both, but it probably won't happen until the next Congress.
Jennifer, I can't see around the corner. Are there any questions in the back? Please wait for the mic and. I'm sorry.
Thank you. I'm John Utley with the American Conservative magazine. What happened to the anti-war movement? What was so big in the last election and totally disappeared? Was Obama considered to be preempted by the Washington establishment, but no commentary is made at all about where it went, if it still exists?
I think it still exists, and it's mostly on the Democratic side of the aisle. I recall looking at the exit poll question and the where are you? What do you think about the war in Afghanistan? In my recollection, Carlin I think is checking the numbers, is that a majority of Democratic voters are basically against the war, against the current policy in Afghanistan, and pretty large majority of Republicans are favoring it. So I can envision the possibility of roll calls where the coalition Norm imagined on trade of Obama administration plus Republicans and some Democrats could prevail. And I think also the suggestion that we could see, could we have a challenge to Barack Obama in the Democratic nominating process in 2012? I have always thought it is kind of a daunting thing for anybody to contemplate taking on the first African-American president. And when you have a series of Democratic contests in which the average African-American percentage in a Democratic primary is around 20 to 25%, those are numbers that would tend to deter a Clinton challenge, which I consider wholly unlikely. But we have had challenges from the anti-war movement, and you have a couple people now that I think are conceivable challengers. You have Governor Howard Dean, who's been treated shabbily by this administration after a pretty good record as Democratic National Chairman. and you have the man who soon will be ex-Senator Russ Feingold.
Give you those numbers. 40% in the exit poll approved of the war in Afghanistan, 54% disapproved, and in fact a 61% majority of Democrats disapproved, a 73% majority of Republicans approved, and that was the only foreign policy question in the poll. Right here.
John Wallstetter, Senior Fellow, Discovery Institute. Carlin, I saw an article claiming that from the exit poll data, that 9% of the voters factored in the broken up airliner Yemeni bomb plot. And I wondered if you saw anything in the data, any percentage on that, and whether you think it had any impact on the election.
I don't recall seeing that question. Michael, do you recall a question about?
Question at the end: were your vote influenced by the what was the terror thing that the plot
I
that
didn't
they were
see that. I'm sorry.
That they were it's right at the end, I think, by the Yemeni package incident. Something like 60%, I think, said they were. Those who were tended to be, I believe, voted more Republican than those who said they were not. I'm not sure I take that question the responses to that question very seriously. You could ask people, were they affected by the weather on Monday and Tuesday? I wouldn't indulge in much interpretation on the basis of that question.
Ballas, a former worker at AEI many years ago. Two questions. Michael, you mentioned that there were 13 states where the Republican power structures might be important in redistricting, and I understand 7 seats are going to be shifted in the House in the next election from essentially Democrat states to Republican states. I wonder if you could quantify some kind of a number where it might work. And then, Norman, you were talking about the Kruger family moving in, and we've seen examples of bomb throwing on the floor. Senator Bunning did things. Are there any incoming senators who you would consider in the Kruger family that you want to warn us about?
Well, as I recall, my estimate is that depending on whether New York loses 2 seats or 1 and Florida gains 1 or 2, off the current projections, there's slightly different projections that basically the Obama 08 states will lose either 6 or 7 House seats, and McCain 08 states will gain or lose a net 6 or 7. Interestingly, Texas is projected to gain 4 seats. And Texas has been the economic leader of the United States in this decade. California is projected to gain 0 seats. That will be the first time since it was admitted to the Union in 1850 that it has not gained seats off a census, and that shows the economic doldrums that California is in. Despite substantial immigration, it has not had its population increase any faster than the national average. So those are the projections. There are elections, those of us who can remember 10 years ago, in which 6 electoral votes can make a difference. So whether or not 2012 will be one of those, we don't know.
So, Wayne, here's a little factoid that may describe the shift that we've seen in our politics. We have a new father-son team in Congress, Rand and Ron Paul, replacing the last father-son team, Ted and Patrick Kennedy. That may reflect the shift in our politics. This case, the younger one is in the Senate, which is interesting too. But if you put Rand Paul and Mike Lee together, I think you've got a couple of people who might decide that Jim DeMint is their role model. I'm more skeptical about Marco Rubio, who has been the Speaker of the House in Florida and who I suspect is considerably more pragmatic. It's important to mention one other dynamic here that may affect policymaking in the Senate, especially in the next 2 years. There are 10 Republicans up in the class of 2012, and they include people like Orrin Hatch and Scott Brown and Olympia Snowe and Bob Corker. They all watched very closely what happened to Bob Bennett, what happened to Lisa Murkowski, and most of them don't have write-in provisions in their states, what happened to Bob Inglis, and they are going to be very cognizant of the fact that if this turns out to be a couple of years where they cooperate, that may spell real trouble for them. Orrin Hatch already has a very likely challenger, Jason Chaffetz, a House member from his right. And I think you're going to see an Orrin Hatch who's not going to talk much about all that he accomplished with Ted Kennedy. And it's basically going to be the old Fritz Hollings, ain't nobody going to get to my right this time around. And I think we're going to see that electoral magnet pulling some of them away from cooperation, which makes it more difficult to figure out how you can make policy.
I'm going to take a question in the back, and then if there's one over here, right up here, we'll take both questions, and then we can have the panel answer. James, if you could.
Clark Judge, White House Writers Group. Henry Olson mentioned prudential conservatism. There's going to be a big push to repeal Obamacare, and my question is, would you recommend that, and what form would you recommend it taking? Second question would be, this is a divided government now, much like the UK and a number of other countries. Do you ascribe any importance to that?
And let's take this question here, too, and then we can have anyone on the panel answer.
Yes, Frank Fletcher. Other than the housing market, there's not deflation but inflation. The trade deficit, the public deficit influence that. The decision as to whether or not other countries will continue to treat the dollar as the reserve currency all would be factors in a potential hyperinflation, which we've never experienced. However, the most critical factor, in my view, would be the behavior of the Federal Reserve and the promiscuous printing of money. Is there an awareness of this among Republicans, and how do you rein in the behavior of the Federal Reserve?
With respect to Clark's question, I think the base is demanding a vote to repeal Obamacare, so I think both leaders have said that they're going to do that. This is one case where you've got half the public that's behind you. I think that's not something that on its face is going to cause problems in the short term. The more important and interesting question is, can they develop a pragmatic conservative plan to deal with health care? Republicans have in the Congress have tried to shy away from that, and the result was the health care reform bill that was passed. A serious conservatism cannot avoid that question anymore, and that's really going to be the litmus test as to whether or not we see whether or not we're going to have a pragmatic conservatism that tries to take advantage of this. Your second question was?
Divided.
Yeah. Right. I think no, I do ascribe importance that I think there's a lot of things that's going around worldwide. Michael Lind wrote a very interesting column in Salon.com that says the abandonment of the decline among parties of the center-left worldwide is a result of the working class, their former base, deserting them. In European countries, it takes different forms than it does here, but you can see that in virtually every developed country. You see rises in virtually every developed country of sentiments on what we would call the progressive left here. Again, in other countries, it primarily is in the rise of a Green Party. Here, it's a rise of factions within the Democratic Party, but that's the same thing, or the same phenomena working itself out in different ways. And at the same time, I think what we're seeing worldwide is a demand for reform but not repeal of the welfare state. People who are recognizing that we can't continue to promise things that we don't produce, but at the same time, there's not a strong constituency, even in this country, the most conservative of the developed world, for return to the pre-New Deal system of political economy. And divided government is a way of reflecting that.
Does anyone want to take a whack at the Federal Reserve question? I should tell you that I once saw a poll that showed that more Americans thought the Federal Reserve was a fine Kentucky bourbon than thought it was the monetary authority.
Well, starting off from where Henry was talking about, I think, we are in a situation where, pragmatism and prudence may counsel what would seem to be rather radical measures. I mean, one looks at what the government in Britain is doing now, which involve 25% budget cuts to many departments and a reduction of 490,000 public sector jobs. I think that California, Illinois, and New York are going to be faced with scenarios where that may be the only prudential thing, even though it doesn't sound very moderate, and it's not something that a middle-of-the-roader would immediately think is the best thing to do, or certainly not a continuation of the status quo. As for the Federal Reserve, are the incoming Republicans aware of the concerns about hyperinflation? My guess is that most of them watch, as I do, Fox News Channel. If you have watched Fox News Channel lately, you will notice there's a lot of ads for gold. It used to be Ditech and get your house refinanced. Now it's gold. I've got to I need to get a channel clicker that automatically pushes the mute button on gold commercials because I can repeat the text. And I think the kind of concerns that seem to be prompting interest in the market for gold are familiar to incoming Republican members of Congress.
We're supposed to finish up about 1:30, and so we'll take a few more questions here and here. There are a couple in the back. We'll take 3 questions, and then the panel can answer them, starting here. Okay. And then 2 in the back. Okay.
Larry Bruiser, Mitsui USA. You've all spoken about the importance of the big government issue as ending the Democrats' majority. I'm wondering how big a risk the same issue poses to the Republican majority. If you look at the new Republican majority, if you look at the House Republicans' pledge to America, they say their biggest goal is to reduce spending and the deficit. But if you look carefully at how they say they're going to do that, there's really not much specifics, and they even say that defense and entitlements are off the table. So my question is, if the Republicans don't achieve much in the way of actually reducing spending or the deficit, how big a risk would this be to their new majority?
Okay, there are 2 questions back here, there, and there. Okay.
Hi, Lucas Stockinger, Konrad Adenauer Foundation. My question is, how do you see the influence of the Tea Party candidates in the new Congress, especially in the House? And what do you think about that candidates like Michelle Bachmann wants to run for the Republican conference chairman? And maybe is that a trend? And because she wants to be the voice of the constitutional conservatives in the GOP.
Then let's take that question in the back too. And
hi there, Jennifer Poulikides with the Association of Public and Land Grant Universities. Do you think that there's any chance that the Republican House would consider investment in science and research differently than other funding? Will investment funding be considered any different than other spending?
Let me take a crack at some of those. I'm a little bit of a skeptic about a substantial cutback in funding in a general way. Part of it is because every time you try and pin anybody except Paul Ryan down on specifics, they dance completely away from it. I mean, they do a better job of moving out of the corner than Muhammad Ali ever could have in his prime. And the focus here is on 2 things: earmarks. Eliminate them all, and boy, you've probably saved the equivalent of 3 drops in the ocean when you look at spending, and a freeze on all discretionary domestic spending back to 2008 levels, which, if it ever took hold, would last only until the next hurricane or oil spill or other disaster. And I think you're going to see a public backlash anyhow. The antipathy towards Washington basically has a lot of people thinking that you could just cut out that waste, fraud, and abuse that all these idiots in Washington have done. None of us would ever notice a thing, and deficits would melt away. When you get to specifics, it doesn't quite work that way. And if you start by saying you're going to eliminate the cutbacks in the growth of Medicare, it doesn't take you very far. So you got to be, I think, a skeptic about that. Just a word or 2 on the Tea Party, and I think just even looking ahead as we speculate, we may be setting things up for what could make the most interesting Republican presidential contest in our lifetimes in 2012, because I can see a number of people stepping forward, starting with Sarah Palin and others, who channel the anger that now has propelled many of those candidates into office about Democrats in Washington, reflecting instead on the mealy-mouthed, lily-livered, weak-spined Republican establishment figures who kept them from getting all of those goals that they should have achieved and that the public had given to them over the course of this next 2 years, which in the practical world are just not going to happen. And that might be enough, unless there's a radical change in the Republican nominating process, to propel somebody who doesn't have wide popular support, especially in the independent group, ahead. And that struggle is going to be a particularly interesting one. And you've got a lot of members of Congress who have attained great fame and fortune, Michelle Bachmann among them, by playing off some of those things. And that will be one of the most interesting things to watch.
I agree with Norm on that last point, but I would hold out a little bit more optimism for non-Tea Party conservatives simply because of the way the primary system is structured. Both New Hampshire and Michigan are early states. They both permit independents and Democrats to vote. Traditionally, they have backed the less conservative of the candidates and consequently given them momentum. And I would find it very odd if there would not be some more moderate conservative who would take advantage of that the way John McCain did in 2000 to build a national identity for himself, given the prominence of the Tea Party sort of rhetoric that the media will be flaring out. On the question of the big government problem, I think that's the problem of pragmatic conservatism, that it needs to have an answer between cutting and maintaining. That the criticism of the left is that you put Republicans in power and all they're going to do is dismantle all those programs that you want. Criticism of the right is, well, all we do is elect conservatives and they end up doing the same old stuff that the Democrats do. And the challenge of conservatism is to come up with an answer that is true to conservative principles, but recognizes the need to govern seriously and make the sort of choices that Norm did and do it in a way that reinforces conservative principles of liberty, opportunity, and family.
Mike?
Well, I think on the Tea Party movement, I think on balance, this influx into politics of perhaps millions of people has been on balance a big advantage for the Republican Party. It's had some offsetting liabilities, however, because when you get millions of people or hundreds of thousands entering into political activity, many of them will be good, solid citizens who will actually turn out to have some political acumen. And I cite Senator-elect Ron Johnson of Wisconsin, who the mainstream media has not been interested in covering because he doesn't illustrate what they want to illustrate, is an example of that. But you also have a certain number of people who are or can be characterized as wackos and weirdos. And, without applying that label to them, I think that the defeats of Sharon Angle and Ken Buck in states where a non-problematic Republican candidate would probably have prevailed in those two highly visible Senate races. Well, Christine O'Donnell in Delaware as well, losing by a wide margin, may put a little bit of a damper or have on the insistence that you always must have the most radical candidate or the most far-out policy solution, because they illustrate that you pay some price for that. Many people in parties and primaries, both Democrats and Republicans, in making choices, often have to balance between getting a candidate who represents their views most closely and one who has a better chance of winning, and different people make that balance differently as voters. But I think this might have those particularly Sharon Angle, who is quite a visible figure nationally running against the Senate Majority Leader, may put a damper on that. On the fiscal issues and so forth, Norm is right to point out that if you want to solve these fiscal problems, you're talking about very major moves that Paul Ryan and some Republicans who've endorsed him are contemplating in an intellectually serious way, but in which most politicians instinctively want to avoid. I would just say that, events may hurl us towards having to face these and come up with things. What's happening in Britain is, I think, relevant. Canada and Sweden went through this in the 1990s. Neither one of them we think of as a right-wing country. And I think that California, Illinois, and New York state governments may present us with something like what New York City presented us with in 1975, a very visible collapse of public finance.
There were some other questions in the back, I think, or right here. Oh, and there's one in the far corner. We'll also get that behind the pillar. Sorry.
Sorry, it's another Tea Party question. Winston Wilkins from Johns Hopkins SICE. If Jim DeMitt and that faction is somewhat successful in bringing certain policies to the right, do you envision? Obviously, it's hard to imagine the left sitting idly by over the next 2 years. Do you envision a similar push from the left to bring in or go after Democrats that they envision as too moderate to bring them over to the left as an answer to the Tea Party faction?
John?
I don't see it at the congressional level that much. I mean, if you look at the caucus now, lots of conservative Democrats have lost, so the main targets are not there. I do think, and I agree with, I don't know if it was Norm who said this, that at the presidential level, or maybe it was Michael, I think Barack Obama has to worry about the challenge from the left, especially regarding the anti-war movement. His decisions on Afghanistan in 2011, they might work out. It might be that he's able to meet his go to that place where he said he would begin reducing troops in 2011, please his left. Things are going okay, but it might not work out. His left may say, look, one of the reasons we liked you in the first place is you were pretty anti-war. That's a danger spot for him. I think that's the place where you might see a challenge from the left, more likely from one of these figures like Howard Dean, Russ Feingold. But I don't see a lot of congressional candidates getting challenged in this round. It maybe down the road there's a Club for Growth on the left that springs up, but I think it's a couple elections away.
It's also the case potentially that the Tea Party could be a gift to Obama in that sense, in the way that some of the investigations against Clinton actually rallied his base, which had some reason to be unhappy with him, with what he did on crime, with what he did on welfare. It was the enemy of my enemy. And if there's an overreaction here, it might actually help Obama, who has problems over Afghanistan, don't ask, don't tell, same-sex marriage, potentially on trade, and a whole host of other issues, not getting a single payer or a public option in the health care plan.
We did see one such challenge in 2010, which was in Arkansas. The unions primarily bankrolled Lieutenant Governor Bill Halter challenging Senator Blanche Lincoln. He was almost successful in that primary, nearly won the runoff, and then Blanche Lincoln was defeated by an unambiguous margin in the general election. I think the lesson I would draw is that no Democrat was electable to that seat, certainly not one who had voted, as Lincoln did finally, for the Obamacare health care bill. But it's the left may draw their conclusions, and the union movement still has a lot of money with public employee unions pumping it in, and being supplied by taxpayers with that money. So they have a desire, perhaps, that we may see other such challenges, despite the apparent futility of the Arkansas challenge. There's certainly primary electorates more sympathetic to a left challenge to a Democrat than that in Arkansas.
Question in the back.
Hi, Gwen Tobert from Homeland Security. And I was wondering, what do you think the results of the election are going to do to Homeland Security policy in terms of budget and programs, especially given the fact that the Tea Party didn't really have much of a Homeland Security platform, and that the Republicans want to reduce spending but are traditionally very for Homeland Security?
Pete King takes over the Homeland Security Committee, and he's very tough and very strong. And coming from New York, perhaps not surprisingly so. I think we're going to see an aggressive push, among other things, and I hope that this is the case, to finally get some reasonable congressional oversight of the department, which Congress has avoided. They've basically fragmented jurisdiction so that they could keep a whole bunch of committee chairs happy. But I also think, especially after the Yemeni plot, after some of these other examples that we're now seeing, going after cargo planes and a whole host of other places where we're getting probes going in, that the sentiment to provide additional funding to beef up security at ports with shipments going by air, and maybe finally also getting to do something more about the chemical and nuclear and other plants that are potentially vulnerable, will probably get some bipartisan support. It does get back to Larry's question, though, because that's a part of discretionary domestic spending for the most part, and you put a freeze on, and you're going to have to start to make some very tough decisions about how you act within that freeze.
There's the Tea Party members, people are trying to read what they believe in a lot of areas that we didn't talk a lot about in the campaign, certainly foreign policy. There's kind of a blank slate and a lot of poll questions as well as the campaigns. I think there's a libertarian instinct there, but the idea that a lot of these guys are across-the-board libertarians who don't believe in any involvement in the world or spending in some of these security areas is wrong. And the one area which I think is most that is on sort of anti-terrorism policy there. Some of these campaigns, actually, that has come up, and they've expressed some stance to be relatively strong in that area.
I'd like to put in a plug here for the continuity project that Norm and John have been working on for so long. I think they're coming out with a new report on the continuity of the Supreme Court. And do you think you'll make any progress on that issue with the new makeup of Congress?
I actually had a brief discussion with Pete King about it last week, and he said we really need to focus on this. But I think we have a problem, which is that the Republican leadership, like its predecessors on the Republican side and like the Democrats, at the leadership level have just shown no interest in dealing with these problems. And whether we'll get a different reaction before we actually get the terrorist attack that has everybody saying, oh my God, how could we have let that slip away, is another question. Yeah, and we're losing a major champion in Brian Baird.
I agree with it.
There's a question in the back right here. Yeah, right, James, right in front of you. Yeah.
Chris Bencher from the Australian Embassy. Did the Citizens United decision make a big difference for the Republicans this year? And do you think unions actually gave money to Republican seats in the northwest?
I don't think the Citizens United made a big difference in the. I think money would have flowed into Republican campaigns. People would have found a way to do it to avoid the Republican National Committee, as some of these organizations did. They would have found another way. And I think that when we sift through the campaign contributions, we will find that K Street, the lobbying community, could, surprisingly enough, read the polls. And starting certainly in the third quarter of this year, perhaps in the second quarter, tilting their having contributed heavily and maxed out in many cases to Democrats, started discovering the virtues of Republican candidates which had been hitherto hidden from them. And that tended to equalize to some considerable extent the money gap that we were finding. And the other lesson I would say is that some of these races show us that money is not hugely decisive. When you've got a situation where people are not really riled up about major issues, then you run a series of TV ads and you can win a campaign when against a candidate who can't afford to put his picture on TV or something. This year you had a lot of situations of people winning primaries, and I think it will turn out general elections with no money. I mean, Tennessee 4, I think, the Democratic incumbent Lincoln Davis, I'm sure, was adequately financed, and the Republican candidate, Mr. Desjardins, at some point, I believe, I stand ready to be corrected on this, but I remember reading that he had virtually no money at all. He won 57-39, or by that a proportion like that.
Norm, I suspect you have a different opinion.
I do. I think it made a very substantial difference, and I'll explain why. But let me say it wasn't just Citizens United. It was the realization on the part of lots of outside activists that the IRS was doing nothing to actually enforce the law and its regulations involving 501c4s and C6s, that you could do pretty much anything that you wanted out there and not have to disclose donors, and that there was no Federal Election Commission, so you didn't have to worry about any violations of the law. it'll be interesting to see if that continues. But here's the difference, basically, that it made. First of all, it made a difference, I believe, at the state legislative level. One of the reasons you see this large shift in seats is there was more money going into state legislative races than we have ever seen before, and a lot of it outside money. And that makes a difference. And if you travel around the country, you're actually seeing substantial numbers of TV ads run by outside groups and state legislative candidates. I've never seen that before. At the same time, one of the reasons why you see relative limits in the congressional swings, even in years when you get a wave in the past, has been this enormous imbalance between the funding and the recognition for incumbents and challengers. In so many cases, it's not a matter of whether an incumbent has adequate resources. They all do. But you've had challengers with nothing and nobody else filling in. Now, when you get a large number of targets, usually what parties and others have to do is make choices. It's like having a huge whack-a-mole game, and you got just a handful of mallets that you can use out there. This time, you had funding for going in to promote challengers or to attack incumbents, most of it to attack incumbents, that had never been there before, and in a much, much wider range. And it wouldn't surprise me to find that 10, 15, even 20 of these House seats might have come out differently because nobody would have been out there spotlighting the incumbent and slamming them at a time that encouraged a different reaction if it weren't for the very substantial increase in funding. It's not so much overall as where it ended up getting targeted.
Before I take what I think is the last question over here, I'd like to thank all of you for coming to these Election Watch sessions. We hope we'll be back in 2012 in January to start this all again. And I also want to thank my colleagues for superb presentations over the course of the year. And now the final question in this corner.
Hello, Barbara Bowie-Whitman. The Tea Party races on the Senate side are pretty high profile, pretty well identified, and it's easy to see the split for one and two. I just wonder how much any of you all have looked into identifiable Tea Party-backed candidates on the House side and what the ratio was of how many of them prevailed.
Well, the Tea Party, there's not one organized Tea Party or Tea Party group, and you've got, one Tea Party movement is manipulated by Sal Russo, who is, what could I say, anything but a political virgin, a Sacramento political consultant who's gotten on the gravy train with many things. So saying who's Tea Party backed is difficult, and who's a Tea Party candidate. How do you define it? I mean, I think Norm was pointed out quite correctly that to say Marco Rubio, is a political neophyte when this is a guy who got himself elected Speaker of the Florida House of Representatives, is simply to misdescribe reality. This is an experienced elected official who showed considerable political acumen prior to becoming a candidate for the U.S. Senate. So I think just, characterize political scientists who are trying to characterize and distinguish between Tea Party and non-Tea Party candidates are going to be hard to find a quantifiable basis for deciding who a Tea Party candidate is. It's more like I know one when I see one.
Henry and then John.
I haven't done that specifically looking at endorsements, but I have looked at the various websites and statements by candidates. I think what you'll find is a lot of the new incoming candidates were talking about the same issues in the same way as Tea Party leaders did. So even if it's not an organizational question, the soul of the Tea Party is coming to Washington.
So what I would say is, weighing the whole of the Tea Party phenomenon, it's still been a very positive thing for Republicans in this cycle. Might not be in other election cycles. I think given the way in which it washed over very conservative and swing districts, you might see in other years that are not as favorable and other Democratic districts it not working. I would have said, well, it was almost universally positive that Christine O'Donnell was the case that stood alone as one who really lost a seat for Republicans. The two seats in Colorado and Nevada does give some pause to that, and there are some cases in House races. But I think you do find people like Raul Labrador. People thought, the Republicans have thrown away that seat. You're never going to win a seat with someone like him, and ends up winning. So I think there still is on balance, quite a large number of people it helped in the House of Representatives, and generally positive, just a little less positive than we thought going into this.
you all for coming, and we'll stay around for a few minutes if you have questions.